The 5 most critical topics to focus in on. Number 1, model selection. Number 2 is memory and memory architecture. 3 is ultimately experimentation, play, tinkering. Number 4 is then going to be a bit more broad and kind of future outlook around the topic of vision, goals, purpose, and the idea of harnessing these frontier level models and intelligence. And then 5th, and I think this is honestly going to be the most important thing to take away from this discussion, is that skills, in my opinion, are going to become intellectual property. When I first opened up OpenClaw, and just for context, I have a separate Mac Mini that I'm running this on, and I don't think that that's necessary. You can do a virtual machine. You can get another small mini PC if you have something else laying around. That's totally fine. So if you were to go onto OpenRouter and you go to the OpenClaw leaderboard, so these are essentially anyone that's using OpenRouter. If you don't know what OpenRouter is, it's just a way to get access to a bunch of different models through one API key. They charge a small minimal fee to route it to the different models versus going direct to the market, but it gives you some flexibility. It's ultimately being led by Kimi K2.5. This is the model I use, and I'll explain why I think it's the best approach. The next one is Trinity Large Preview. I did experiment with this. I found it to be terrible. I only think it's at the position that it's in is because it's free right now. Minimax 2.5, and then obviously we have the Anthropic models. So the first thing that I'll say, and I spent time experimenting. I tried different models. I tried to develop a router solution where some models will be tapped for certain use cases to keep costs down, and then for more complicated tasks, we'll use a more expensive models. My biggest takeaway is you need to just pick a high quality model. You need frontier intelligence. There's a podcast that the creator of OpenClaw has done with Lex Friedman. His name's Peter Steinberger. I think it's a great starting point that if you don't even know what this project is, or you want to learn more about it, this is a fantastic podcast. It's like 3 hours long, so you can obviously throw it into Gemini, try to get some Spark notes and ask questions about it. But I think he's been very critical. He's also said this on X quite a bit. You need to use frontier intelligence because it's a security vulnerability, and the entire experience breaks if you have a shitty model. The best model that he recommends is Opus 4.6. That is incredibly expensive. And now, even if you're using the OAuth and there's some workarounds, there's been debates on X about Anthropic potentially cutting off that pathway for OpenClaw. Google with their Gemini models has kind of gone down that pathway as well too. It's really a debate to see if OAuth is going to be available going forward. So if you really want to use them in the safest route possible, it's going to be through API calls, and it's going to cost you so much if you're going to be using Opus 4.6. Now, budget doesn't matter. Go that pathway. That's what I would recommend. Most people don't have $100+ a day to spend on API calls. You then need to consider costs. So the next best option would be Sonnet 4.6, still very expensive. So then what would come after that? It's then going to be Kimi K2.5. Now, Minimax, I did experiment with Minimax, and there's nothing wrong with Minimax. What I like about OpenRouter is you can also compare models as well. So if I go to Kimi K2.5 and we put it side by side with, let's say, Sonnet 4.6, and let's do Minimax here as well, you can kind of get an idea of their strengths and nuances with them. So obviously Sonnet has the biggest context length. I don't think context windows matters as much as people would lead them to believe with respect to OpenClaw, and we'll talk about that when we get to memory architecture. But you do want frontier intelligence. That is really critical to get right. And we look at cost here. This is substantial, right? I don't even want to get into Opus. It's disgusting how expensive that is. One thing you'll notice with Minimax is it only has text as an input modality, so that really sucks when you're trying to take a screenshot and send it to your OpenClaw instance, right? So input modalities for me, that straight up, that is a huge killer feature that it kind of pushed me away from Minimax. The other big thing that I would talk about here is you have to experiment. So if you don't believe me, use Minimax. Try to experiment with it. What I found was, even though it is cheaper, it's about half the cost of Kimi K. I found so many frustrating moments where it wouldn't get something done, and then I'm burning through a significant amount of credits to eventually get something that would have worked right out the gate with something like Kimi K. And if you do look at benchmarks, it is very comparable to Sonnet 4.5. It's not as good as 4.6, but it is incredible for the cost, and I think this is the best option. Now, if you're just getting into this and you're experimenting, I would say start with OpenRouter because the credits can then be swapped into different models as you need to. But over time, if you're like set in stone and you want to go with Kimi, go to Moonshot and open up an account directly with them. I found this to be way cheaper. The caching is far more effective, and especially for things like heartbeats and a lot of input that is kind of repetitive, which is kind of in the nature of OpenClaw. It actually will save you a lot more cost over time. So the logs aren't as great as OpenRouter, but you can actually see here, like, just from the consumption analysis, more than half is actually going to the context caching. The other benefit with Kimi K is if you're willing to spend, and eventually if you can get your hands on a Mac Studio, just because they're sold out right now, and I know the new ones are coming out mid-2026, where you can have unlimited access to frontier intelligence, and then you can run this 24/7, and it's an incredible model in my opinion. So right now I'm just doing the API call. I'm doing it through Moonshot directly. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is memory architecture. There's essentially 3 things that I've done to make my memory experience much better. So number 1 is this open source project. It's called QMD that Toby, so this is the creator of Shopify, actually created. This combined with another thing called Para, and this is something that has been made known by Tiago Forte, and this is a concept of projects, areas, resources, and archives. And we'll talk about this in a second as well, and how these all kind of map together. So it's QMD plus Para plus what I'll kind of call a memory consolidation plan, but I'll let my OpenClaw describe it because I just said, can you provide me with an overview of your memory architecture, the QMD system, and Para, and how they all work together, the advantages of not having a system like this for OpenClaw. So the best way I would think of it, again, going back to this Tiago Forte methodology, there's essentially 4 buckets. So there's going to be projects. This is active work with a finish line. Areas, on the other hand, are very similar to projects. However, they're ongoing responsibility. So there's no finish line in sight. Resources would then be reference material. This can be like the model provider stack, security references. Again, if you almost think of like an employee, this is like the employee handbook, right? As an example. And then the last one is going to be archives. So things that are completed or inactive items. Then the next thing is this QMD. It's a 3-stage pipeline. It's a form of local embedding. So there's a local model that I'm running on my Mac Mini M4. It's very lightweight, so you could actually run this in the cloud as well if you did this on a virtual machine. And essentially the idea is like, it still works off of plain markdown files, which is how OpenClaw was initially designed for, but it goes through a process. And right now I have it set up to do once a day, nightly, where it'll actually embed all of the key memory files within the workspace for my OpenClaw. So that way, when working with it again in the future, I have a much better experience because we can manage context so much better. And that again, going back to Peter Steinberger here, one of the key things that he focuses in on with your experience with OpenClaw, it's context management. So yes, you can use bigger and better models that have much bigger context windows, but at the end of the day, you want only what's relevant to be in the context window. And if you bloat it and you get context rot, you're gonna get a bad experience. And that's why I found this QMD structure to be very effective in having a great experience every single time I'm interacting with my OpenClaw instance. Think of this like the human brain in many ways, right? So I talk to it, and every day it develops a file. So this file is just going to go into the category of memories, and it's going to capture the date. So 2026, March 4th. And it's going to be raw capture. Then from there, what happens overnight, midnight, there's going to be this memory consolidation cron job. And its goal is ultimately to extract relevant information into those 4 categories: projects, areas, resources, and archives. And now what happens is at 12:30, so after this cron job finishes, there's the QMD reindex that happens nightly. So we have the fresh vector index for the next morning. So then if I ask anything about any topic, it now has all the fresh index that was embedded with that local model. So it's completely free. I own it all. All of the data is captured to MD files, which is how OpenClaw was designed. So I get a really high quality experience with my OpenClaw that just compresses everything perfectly overnight. So I don't need to get into all this, but like, you know, some advantages of having the system versus not having the system, like it's more token efficient, only relevant snippets enter the context. So you get, again, context management is so critical for OpenClaw to have a really good experience. I don't have any vendor lock-in, so I'm not actually using like Pinecone or some external third-party database. I'm doing this all locally, which I think builds on the essence of what OpenClaw is as an open source project, and I own all the data. I'm not running my large language model locally, but that is something that I would potentially consider in the future. And then, I forgot to mention, so then we have also the memory MD files, and you want to keep this as lean as possible. You actually want to keep all of those core files as lean as possible because those get injected at every single interaction. Only the most important things that are absolutely critical should make its way up to memory. Otherwise, most things that are relevant should stay in para files, and the daily logs are just going to be so verbose and so raw, like there's just so much in it. So yeah, I just think like if you're gonna do anything, like, and I'm not trying to push people in one direction or another, I think these are the 2 things you have to get right. upgrade the memory architecture and figure out a solution that will work with what you're trying to accomplish, and pick a frontier model. I recommend Kimi K2.5. If you want to try Minimax, go for it. If you want to try Gemini Flash, go for it. I just keep touching on this play, experiment, and tinker. We're in the early stages of this. Like, no one can say with confidence that like they're an expert in this space. It's so new. So you can watch videos, I encourage you to, critique what I'm saying, listen to what other creators are saying. No one has the right answer at this point because of how new it is. And like, I don't mean to make this as a shot, but there's a great creator, his name's Riley Brown. I listen to a lot of his content. He's someone that I do admire and respect. I think his opinion is great. He made a recent video about specialized agents being a more superior framework, to the extent that we should have hundreds of agents potentially working for a business, and you're managing them all through the cloud, and they have centralized tools that they all kind of use. And this almost mimics more like what large-scale organizations eventually become, where Fortune 500 companies, it's not uncommon for them to have tens of thousands of employees, and you see quickly how silos start to form, and you create breakdown in communication, even if things are agentic. And so the other flip side of this is like, do we just have one agent that could effectively do everything? And so his claim is that agents start to break down as they are given more responsibility, more tools, and they struggle to actually do too many things well. And then you start to get, he claims there's a sweet spot around 7 to 10 tools. Beyond that, it starts to kind of break apart. I don't know what models he's using, so I think that's also a key piece to kind of consider as well. A key thing about models like Kimi K is that not only are they a mixture of experts, but they were trained with what's known as parallel agent reinforcement learning to enable efficient, large-scale agentic workflows. And so what it actually does is it spawns an agent swarm when it's trying to actually complete tasks. And those small sessions, if you will, or replicants, it can orchestrate up to 100 specialized subagents simultaneously. And it's kind of crazy to think about this because this is so novel. This didn't exist as far back as 3 to 6 months ago. So when I was actually working on agentic projects in the past, you would want to be a lot more narrow, and you would want to kind of go this direction that Riley's talking about, where you set some firm guardrails. It's very limited in terms of the tool calls and what you can do. And the instructions were a lot more narrow because you didn't want the agent to struggle with edge cases and then fall apart and not actually execute. And while I think there's a time and place for that, what we are starting to see with these more frontier level intelligence is this. And if you want to actually experiment this, so I'll just show you on Grok, like typically what it looks like. If you hit this drop down and you go to beta, so try Grok 4.2 beta, but you'll see it in Grok. It actually spawns up these agents. And I know this is more of just like a UI so you can see what it looks like, but this is actually what's happening in practice. Now, here, what these agents will do is a bunch of different agents will go off on their own tangents of research, so it can do more research in parallel. Then they converse with one another, bring everything back up, and then consolidate it all to get an answer. But this can apply not for research queries, but it can apply for actual tool use as well. And that's where I'm kind of saying, like, this is the frontier of where intelligence is at with a lot of these models. And so that's why I kind of go against this notion of we should be creating all these specializations. I think the logic would actually be push an agent as far as you absolutely can. And then if it starts to bleed and make mistakes, then you may want to consider an additional agent to support that framework. So this concept of harnessing, Peter Steinberger talks about it, and it's really to say that like frontier intelligence is smart, it's clever. And so if you are just able to give it vision, purpose, and goals and check in on it and provide it guidance as you're kind of working with it, you're effectively able to better harness its full potential rather than you trying to give it very narrow specific roles. It's almost like you're putting a genius, in a role that's like a simple administrative role. It can obviously do it, but in some ways it's kind of broken because you're trying to give it roles and tasks, and you're better off just saying, get this done, or here's the vision, here's the goals, and let it run off, build up a plan, spawn up its subagents, and then get it done. The model can manage up to 100 subagents, handling over 1,500 parallel tool calls, search, code execution, and browsing. And so this brings me to the final point here, and this is around the topic of skills. And I think this is ultimately going to become the IP of the future as more and more organizations adopt Claw or OpenClaw like instances. This is a really good explanation that my OpenClaw was able to provide on this topic. We have the native tools, which are going to be like the stuff that come off the shelf with OpenClaw. We then have the MCP tools, which are designed specifically for that application, so in this case, Supabase. And then we have skills, which are kind of the bespoke wrappers with domain expertise that sit on top of these MCP tools or wrap them. And then workflows are the next kind of meta layer above that, where you chain a bunch of the skills together to accomplish a really high level task. And we may not necessarily need to actually define the workflows. It may just be enough for me to actually prompt in English, and then the OpenClaw is able to actually go and apply everything below to actually get it done. So I think this is where like, we don't even know how far you can kind of take these OpenClaw agents with this frontier intelligence. That's why I think it's so powerful, because the more you can experiment and play and tinker, you'll develop skills, like a skills matrix and workflows to actually get stuff done that typically humans would, need a whole team to effectively get done. And it really kind of begs the question of like, how far can we push these agents? And so what I would say is, if you're just getting started with OpenClaw today, I think build it yourself. Don't go through like these one-click setup processes, because I think we're at the earliest innings of this, and it's important to experiment, play, learn, see where you can push it, where it falls apart, experiment with all the different models. Despite what I'm saying, if you want to skip ahead, just pick Kimi K. I would say set up the memory architecture from day one, so that way it's actually remembering and learning and doing things efficiently from the onset. Or don't, experiment with it, and then if you want to come back to this video and apply what I've done, you can do that. Think about this. I think this is really critical too. It was initially designed to be a personal assistant, right? Like that's the vision of the project. So the way I've designed my OpenClaw is to act as the COO and co-founder of this business that I'm building out. So in other words, like it's very narrow, it's specific, it gets the vision, it gets the goals, it understands its role, its purpose, the soul, and all the documents are all built around that. So you get a very, like, not rigid, but you get a really unique experience versus it being a personal assistant that also is helping me on my business. And I think that's important to consider, because all those things act as the harness that powers the underlying, or like that kind of guides the underlying power of these super intelligent LLM models. So that's why I think getting the harness right is so critical. And it's not to say you can be an entrepreneur and work on 10 businesses and your OpenClaw helps you with all those things. I'm just saying the more you kind of fragment things, it always comes back to that context management. Maybe I should just even add a note there for context management. And again, if you don't believe me, like listen to Peter Steinberger talk about this. Listen to experts in this space that are actually building out the framework for this, because otherwise people just get in their mind like, this is what it was designed for, this is how you can use it, and then they just get a really poor experience overall. So anyways, that's kind of my overall view on OpenClaw. I am using it to build a business. I'm experimenting as I build it all out, but it's been a really fun experience. And I think this is honestly going to be the future. I used to make videos around N8N. I think that has its use case, and it's very auditable. It's easy to kind of visualize workflows. It can be great for certain applications, but this is just so much more exciting, because instead of building out N8N workflows, I can essentially just build skills with my OpenClaw instance, and then it can essentially do all these N8N skills, maybe not the right term, workflows, whatever you want to call them. And it can know them, it understands the context, it understands how to apply them. It's just so much more dynamic and self-improving. And I've never been excited like this since, ChatGPT came out. It's such a unique moment in time. So I think, again, the further ahead you can get on this, the better, and experiment and play. Because I think you'll watch videos online with people claiming they know what the best practices are. It's so new. Like anyone who's saying that, again, take it for what it is, try it out. And if it makes sense, great. Don't listen to everything that I'm saying. I'm just telling you what I'm doing and the value that it's provided in my experience with OpenClaw. I'm just here to share to the community.